Your Excellency Mrs. Kiara Shaw, Chargée d'Affaires for the Australian High Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner Mrs. Lalo, newly minted and arrived in Mauritius, welcome, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Academia, the Dean of the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, our keynote speakers who will join us, will be joining us online, representatives of the Foreign Embassy, media communication professional, colleagues, friends, students. Welcome to today's event. The theme today that we've chosen is a very hot topic. Everyone is speaking about disinformation. Even I noted that it's an item at the G7 meeting that is being held currently in Hiroshima. So in fact, disinformation affects all the spheres of our life, our daily lives, our daily activity. Today we'll be shining light a little bit on the Mauritian landscape, but we'll also have the opportunity to hear from two experts in the field, Dr. Davis, an Australian expert, and also from the Executive Director of Africa Check. And so basically to just give us a little bit of an idea of what are the existing best practices and possible solutions, because some of the solutions are universal, but some of them are localized. So we will be trying to sort of garner some of those efforts, scenarios that have actually been tried and tested in certain other parts of the world, the African continent and Asia Pacific, and more specifically Australia. You all have a copy of the program. You will see it's a full day. Oh, it's a half a day, but a very, very packed session, which runs one after the other. And we hope that most of you will be able to stay with us until the end. But we understand that some of you will have to be leaving after the opening ceremony. So also very important here, I would like to put on record, we are very obliged to the Australian High Commission for having approached the communication unit to hold this very important session on disinformation, countering disinformation. It's the first that you are holding with the communication unit, and I hope it will be the first among many. So that's just to set the ball rolling and to demonstrate, these types of collaboration are extremely important, especially for institutions like the University of Mauritius and the communication unit. So without further ado, I will ask, just get a hold of the program, I'll ask our Pro-Vice Chancellor for Academia, Professor Santali, to say a few opening remarks, and then we'll move. Thank you.
Thank you, Australian High Commissioner, Ms. Shaw, Deputy High Commissioner, Ms. Katie Lalo, Dean of Faculty, Professor Corporan, colleagues from the University, Dr. Kasenali, our keynote speakers, students, colleagues of the University, colleagues from the press, students, ladies and gentlemen. The University of Mauritius is pleased to co-host this workshop on countering disinformation to ensure an open and transparent Infoscape with the Australian High Commission of Mauritius. This workshop is organized to celebrate the World Press Freedom Day, which was celebrated on the 3rd of May this year, and the choice of the theme, disinformation, reflects a key concern in a society driven by digital media, technologies, and now artificial intelligence. Information and knowledge that is widely available out there, if used to good essence and if their integrity is maintained, can lead to prosperity, promote peace, and more understanding among mankind. However, disinformation, misinformation, fake news, and other forms of information manipulation for wrong purposes can lead to destructive consequences for humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to note a very diverse audience in attendance. We have embassy representatives, media professionals, students, academics, and other key actors of the sector. This will allow for a rich debate on such an important theme. The university is committed to promoting the development of the knowledge society in line with our core values. This workshop testifies of our engagement to promote high-level exchanges with different actors in the society. The senior management looks forward to receiving the workshop report, which we have no doubt will be highly informative. As an end note, I would like to thank again the Australian High Commission for their support, in particular the High Commissioner, as well as Dr. Kasenali, Christina Chanmitu, Dr. Narayanan, the Dean of Faculty, for their leadership in organizing today's event. Thank you and have a fruitful workshop.
Thank you very much, Provisy, for those opening remarks. I will now ask Her Excellency the High Commission, the Chargée d'Affaires, Mrs. Kiara Shaw, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everybody. Professor Mohamed Santali, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, and other faculty members, thank you very much to the University of Mauritius for hosting us here today. And thank you also to the fantastic team here that's helped put this event together. Associate Professor Rukaya Kasanelli, Mrs. Christina Chanmitu, and Dr. Sandra Narayanan. It's also really good to have some international contributors, so I'm really proud that we're able to bring Dr. Michael Davis into this discussion to share some of the experience and expertise from Australia. And it's also great to see Mr. Noko Magato, the Executive Director of Africa Chair, who can give us a sort of broader African context as well. And we've also been really pleased to see the fantastic mix of panellists that were able to join today's discussion. So we're really proud to support this discussion to raise awareness and stimulate discussion about disinformation in Mauritius. It's really good to have a healthy and broad mix of contributors from across the media landscape, as well as academia, government and civil society. I think we've got just the people we need in the room to explore how the phenomenon of disinformation is playing out and impacting Mauritius. It's certainly not a new phenomenon. In fact, I think efforts to manipulate information are perhaps as old as civilization, or at least politics. But the speed, volume and sophistication of information transmission have radically transformed and amplified the potential use of misinformation. Disinformation is now recognised as something that can threaten democracy. And so before we begin the focus on the local landscape, I wanted to share a few thoughts on how disinformation is impacting the international landscape. This has become a matter of increasing concern for Australia, as a country that upholds freedom of expression and sees the free flow of information as essential to democracy. And certainly when I joined the Australian government, not that much more than 10 years ago, it wasn't discussed in the way it is now. We've got dedicated teams in the government, certainly in my ministry, looking at how it's playing out internationally, but also locally in terms of how disinformation is affecting the Australian community and how it might be a risk to community cohesion. So Australia defines disinformation as the intentional creation and dissemination of wholly or partly false or manipulated information that is intended to deceive and mislead. It can be done for a variety of reasons. For example, to cause strategic, political, economic, social or personal harm, or to get commercial gain. And so there are of course many examples of disinformation being used and taking place within a domestic context of a particular country. But it can also be part of a deliberate campaign by state actors or non-state actors who are representing the interests of their government. Foreign disinformation campaigns can be integrated into a country's domestic political discussions so that its foreign roots are invisible. One example is attempts to sow discord or disagreement in a population on a particular topic. Disinformation campaigns can be used to divide or weaken political movements that are not seen as favourable to a foreign actor, or disinformation may be surreptitiously used to boost groups that are linked to or promote a foreign power. Another example is disinformation being used to cast doubt around a proposed course of action by a government that might be seen as contrary to the interests of a foreign power. So for example, and I can't speculate on the veracity of this, but there's a lot of media speculation that foreign actors may have supported pro-Brexit narratives in the UK. Disinformation doesn't just impact domestic audiences. It can also be used to shape the way states see each other. It can be deployed to undermine support for international initiatives or to challenge the authority or moral standing of a country so that it loses relative influence. So an example from Australia that I think illustrates this quite well is the mischaracterisation of our AUKUS defence arrangement. Australia, for example, is acquiring submarines that are nuclear powered but which do not have any nuclear weaponry whatsoever. And Australia is a state that has long championed the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. Unfortunately, there are now some actors who have tried to mischaracterise these submarines as breaking our long-standing commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. And at present, we're also seeing a global disinformation campaign and false narratives, for example, about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some of these narratives are intended to flip the story or muddy the waters by blaming the West or NATO expansion. And sometimes even mainstream journalists pick up these narratives without fact-checking the history or even acknowledging that there might be other sides of the discussion. Unfortunately, this misinformation and disinformation is designed to dampen the international condemnation that should flow from a clear violation of the UN Charter. The information we receive shapes how we perceive the world and the decisions we make and how we respond to events. So that's where information that's misleading or manipulated can undermine the ability of governments and peoples to decide their own destinies. Disinformation can damage the ability of countries to act in their own interests or to present clear information to their populations and the international community. It can undermine the international rules that promote a peaceful world order where sovereignty is respected. Often our discussions about international relations and conflict focus on kinetic conflict where you have armies and military activities, but actually I think disinformation really shows how one country can seriously harm another country without any physical contact. In recent years, elections around the world have shown that there is a great capacity for digital disinformation, including across borders. Malicious actors have effectively hijacked public discourse and influenced communities and public opinion on matters of importance. Even platforms that were designed to enable the free flow of information, like social media platforms, have been misappropriated to spread and amplify disinformation and sow division in communities. One very prominent example that featured a lot in global headlines was the 2016 US election. There was a report by the US Special Counsel Robert Mueller that found there was evidence that Russia had interfered in the election with a coordinated campaign of disinformation. And one of the things that I personally found striking as I observed this play out was that disinformation wasn't just targeting political parties or actors. The New York Times, in a fascinating long analysis that I read last year, showed how Russia's disinformation machine had targeted the women's movement in the US. It had deliberately tried to divide and weaken the movement, just as it was mobilizing protests against the then president. Part of this campaign involved impersonating the voices of Americans on social media to discredit, sometimes in highly personal ways, the leaders of the movement. A lot has happened since 2016 on the tech front. We have new technologies that are being used to amplify campaigns much more dramatically than they could have even 5-10 years ago. Bots can drown out legitimate online debate by planting huge volumes of fake conversation. Technology has enabled malicious micro-targeting of particular vulnerable audiences, and there are sophisticated deepfakes that can be used to convincingly spread disinformation. And in recent months, the world has started to grasp the potential risks from the high-powered AI technology that can instantly produce reams of credible-sounding but sometimes false or biased information. I have to confess, I did actually consult ChatGPT on this speech, but decided I'd stick with my own content for now. So democratic countries with open information environments are actually more vulnerable to this type of manipulation. Multiple media sources can pop up to amplify messaging. Authoritarian countries that limit what media can say or control journalists are actually a little bit more immune than democratic countries to this form of disinformation campaign, which is what makes it even more important that democratic countries with open media environments have discussions like the one that we're having today to try and build resilience, to be able to identify and address deliberate disinformation campaigns. Another thing that worries me as an international relations practitioner is the proliferation of online platforms and news sources that you can't really pin down to geographical location or any sort of editorial standards that have articles on controversial issues in international affairs. I frequently stumble upon analysis from commentators who, even though they have names, are not necessarily Googleable journalists. And often they reprint articles from other news sources around the world that accentuate in criticism of governments or particular elements that seem to me to point to some sort of deliberate campaign behind them. So that's why I think mainstream media is actually incredibly important, and I'm really glad at the participation of mainstream media here today. Established media houses need to maintain their reputational advantage by applying rigorous editorial policies that separate them from anonymous online sources. So what do all these developments mean for Mauritius? Well, I look forward to hearing from the many contributors present here today about the risks in the Mauritian information environment, but also how the rich media environment that Mauritius enjoys as a small island and the talented journalists that are practicing here can help mitigate some of those risks. Governments also play an important role, including by ensuring the right regulatory frameworks. And also I believe that academics, civil society and journalists have really important roles in questioning and reporting on disinformation campaigns. So thank you all for joining today's discussion, and I look forward to hearing what comes out of it.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for really setting the scene to our conversation of today's workshop. I think, you pointed out some very, very pertinent issues around disinformation, but I think, disinformation and technology and the way that technology is used is the intentionality behind technology, but also the utility that it is used. And I think being able to sort of factor that in mind allows us to deal probably with disinformation in a much more intelligent and focused manner. And exactly just like you, we all struggle to keep away chat GPT away. So I think it's all about how we use it.